What if you had a way that you could regenerate the cells that were damaged in your brain and actually facilitate a healing process that has the potential to give you better cognition, better focus, better mental clarity in the long run? A lot of our clients, they notice so much mental clarity when they do the exosomes, and especially when they add the methylene blue with it, because they are getting more of this antioxidant production. I got the dosing that they were using and had it done, and it just made a profound impact on my brain. And we've seen that in close to 1,000 patients that were treated. Just phenomenal clarity.
If you can take care of your brain really well now, as opposed to once you start noticing your brain going, that's probably the biggest piece you can do. Welcome everybody to the Unreasonable Health Podcast, and this is Cade Archibald. I got along with me Regan Archibald, founder of East West Health, the man himself. Regan, how you doing today?
Been a great day.
I'm excited to jump into today's topic here.
Okay, well, let's do it, because this is probably one of the most important things and breakthroughs to date at East West. And it's when it comes to stem cells and regenerative medicine, these are things that we've brought in over the years and we've seen massive changes. But what if you had a way that you could regenerate the cells that were damaged in your brain and actually facilitate a healing process that has the potential to give you better cognition, better focus, better mental clarity in the long run? And that's what we'll be talking about today. So today we're going to talk about 3 different things, and I'm going to share with you some of the insights that I've learned on these. But before we jump in, let's talk about what stem cells are. And there's different types of stem cells. Just for the record, we are not talking about induced stem cells that are designed to treat, diagnose, prevent any disease. We're talking about the cells that help rejuvenate the brain, rejuvenate the body. And so some of the biggest controversy came around embryonic stem cells, and rightfully so, because these embryonic stem cells, or fetal stem cells is what they're sometimes called. These are pluripotent or totipotent stem cells that just want to replicate and become, they want to help grow a new baby. And those can be problematic when it comes to, long-term safety, because you don't want to put cells in your body that don't stop replicating. But there's also adult stem cells, and these are found in tissue like your bone marrow, your fat. They're in the umbilical cord. And these are used for repair and regeneration, and that's what we'll be referencing today primarily. So if you think about regenerative medicine, the FDA has this advanced track for the accelerated track for regenerative medicine. And we saw that in Utah with the Senate Bill 198 that gave clinics like ours the capability of continually using these stem cells from perinatal tissue sources. And we're saying, that right now there's lots of studies that are going on at any given time, and we're seeing breakthroughs with joint degeneration, neurodegeneration, autoimmunity, so many more things. And if you think about how stem cells work in a regenerative property, they are anti-inflammatory. They modulate the immune system. So what that means is these cells can inform the immune system, where if your immune system's over functioning, like your Th1, Th2 cells aren't balanced, it helps calm those down, or helps improve the white blood cell count. If you do happen to have low white blood cells, it helps with tissue repair. And then the thing we're going to be talking about today is the neuroprotective side of these cells. And we're going to be focusing on mesenchymal stem cells, primarily from umbilical cords. And we'll talk about exosomes. Cade, how would you explain what exosomes are for, in a way that your kids can understand?
So exosomes, they're like signaling messengers. So, if you they go in and kind of alert. They're just little teeny little vesicles, or I'm trying to think of how I would explain it to my kids other than they're just these little cells that actually go in and they prime the rest of the body to receive regeneration or receive stem cells. So, it's like a messenger kid that runs around the neighborhood and gets everybody kind of jazzed up to have a fun party.
There we go. Yeah. Okay, that works. And the other ways you can say, like in Star Wars, how there's the big ship, and then all those little planes that leave the big ship. Those are like the exosomes. The big ship being the stem cells. So the exosomes just go and turn up the volume and direct a lot of the healing properties. And then the PRP is like, this is where you can use your own blood, and that just activates. These are primarily growth factors, a platelet-rich plasma. So stem cells, there's a lot of things there's a lot of reason to believe that this is the future of regenerative medicine because of its ability to reduce pain. And we do have a no pain policy at East West. You just don't want to, hang around with pain for too long because it does seem to get worse. Stem cells enhance your tissue repair and recovery. And what that means is if you've had injuries that you're not recovering from, it helps you in the ability to recover. It supports healthy aging, longevity, and then the potential in so many different ways. And so exosomes can be used independent of stem cells. And one of the things in our at-home regenerative medicine program is we send vials of exosomes to our clients where you can self-administer just like you would a peptide exosomes. And it's a great way of turning on the volume of stem cells. And for those of you who have come out to the clinic, you've had regenerative medicine, or whether you've had it somewhere else, these vials of billions of these exosomes from very healthy mothers who have undergone a C-section birth, and their tissue was retrieved and taken to the lab and processed within 20 minutes so that there's not a massive attrition rate in the stem cells. Well, those exosomes are taken from those stem cells and those same tissue from these mothers that haven't been vaccinated and from their birth tissue. And then those exosomes can help turn up this cell-to-cell communication because cell signaling is so important in your body's overall communication and health. And then this can facilitate tissue repair and immune modulation. And I always say that one of the reasons I do exosomes, I do stem cells frequently is because, yes, we have great diagnostic tools, but these messengers can detect when there's imbalances in your body or disease long before diagnostic tests will ever display that.
Yeah, I think a good example, like if you look at liver function, typically you don't see liver enzymes start elevating until there's some pretty significant stuff going on with the liver, right? And there's a lot of instances where just things can go undetected. I think that's like it's a beautiful way to like dial in that health and longevity. Just give your cells a nice little reboot.
That's it. Yeah. Very easy to do, very safe. These exosomes, they're formed in the endosomal system of the cells, and they're there to create a nice environment for the stem cells to proliferate. And so, like I mentioned, they come from mesenchymal stem cells. Some of the things that you'll find in exosomes of the brain, one of the studies I looked at is where they induced a stroke in rats. And they did the intranasal exosomes. They just did an exosome nasal spray, and you could see where the exosomes were able to mobilize themselves right around the damage in the brain. And then you started to see this reparative mechanism kick in.
Wow.
And so even this slide here where you can see that when there's been a neural inflammation and damage, it activates these microglial cells, and the microglia are what protect the neurons. And then what happens is you get all these inflammatory cytokines, and that just drives these chemokines almost drive the degeneration. So that's one of the reasons why we have like memory impairment and neurological issues. But then when exosomes come in there, they can sweep out a lot of those inflammatory molecules. So it gives your body the ability to start healing. And then once you can calm down the microglial cells, then you can prevent some of that chronic inflammatory pattern, because it's that chronic inflammation where the brain never gets a chance to detoxify. And so you build up that amyloid beta plaque and you start losing the ability for the cells to signal. And this is where even adding in like lion's mane, for example, lion's mane's been shown to help improve the neural growth factors. And so you get these little dendrites that start growing when you take lion's mane. So, there's some really cool things you can do with exosome, lion's mane, new pep. There's plenty of things you can do to activate it. But the big barrier is the blood-brain barrier. And I think this is what a lot of people probably miss, is that you've got all these junctions that protect our bodies from the outside world. So if you think of our gut, the gut barrier protects you from eating food from the outside world that's not necessarily sterile. You would not want to do an IV of like a piece of meat. I mean, it's just, yeah, here, you want a cheeseburger? Do you want to chew it, or would you like an IV?
I'll take an IV, please.
I think I'll chew it this time. I mean, it's just the sterilization. I don't think there'd be much nutrient value left, but yeah, these barriers protect us. And so you have what's called the blood-brain barrier, and that prevents infections or, bacterial species and toxins from entering into the brain. But the other thing that happens with this blood-brain barrier is it's large enough where some of the exosomes can make it through. But that's where intranasal becomes really important, especially when you're using like a tissue allograft and stem cells. And so the blood-brain barrier, the other thing that can happen when you get exosomes through it is you can actually have a reparative impact on the mitochondria. And this is where a lot of our clients, they notice so much mental clarity when they do the exosomes, and especially when they add the methylene blue with it, because they are getting more of this antioxidant production. And even something like kratom, for example, or kratom, it actually has antioxidant producing effects for the brain. So at the right dose, it's a way you can clean your brain, and it calms things down. It works on some of the opiate-like growth factors and in inducing a little bit of serotonin and dopamine and epinephrine effects. So another good thing you can stack with it. Exosomes also been shown to be neuroprotective, and they do activate stem cells. And so some of the research that's ongoing is the fact of using stem cells and exosomes in conditions to like remyelinate the nerves. And like you could think of that in something like a MS application. But the other thing that it does is it's got this nice gut-brain connection when you start, activating this glymphatic circulation in the brain, and you clean out the brain and you lower the inflammatory stress on the brain, you correct the blood-brain barrier, and then you're going to notice that you'll have just a much better insight between the brain and the gut. And just by correcting the brain, you'll start to see the gut microbiota change its structure. And you'll see, without doing anything different, you can see a change in the gut microbiota just by fixing that vagus nerve in the brain.
Wow. Yeah, there's some really cool applications here that just so robust. Especially really cool how exosomes are so small. They can penetrate the blood-brain barrier much easier than, in the past we've tried doing like stem cell IVs, and in order to get them to pass through the blood-brain barrier, you got to add in some different medications that kind of expand that barrier, where exosomes don't necessarily have to do that. You can also obviously just introduce it intranasally, and that's typically what we've seen being the most effective.
Yeah, and this is even, it's a really healthy application for somebody who has like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or just digestive issues that, the typical protocols like SIBO protocols or gut cleansing and reinoculation, if that doesn't work, there's, the cool thing about medicine today is there's very, very interesting options found right now. I mean, exosomes, it works on the microRNA regulation. Like I mentioned, the detoxification and clearance of debris. So we're looking at it for the possibility of removing some of the toxic proteins, like the beta amyloid and tau in Alzheimer's disease. And then it does activate that glymphatic system. And I think that's something we're learning more and more about. There's lots of interesting studies on this. Here's some of the references for the material that we went over. But But yeah, if you think about like in the frontiers, you'll find the role of exosomes as mediators of neural inflammation and the pathogenesis and treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Yeah, these are things that everybody wants real treatment for Alzheimer's, something that's really effective and something that's very safe. So far, we don't have that, but I think that we're getting closer. And I think that exosomes, stem cells, some of these nootropics can be really helpful. And so now that we've talked exosomes, then we'll move into like, well, where did these exosomes come from? And that's, they all come from stem cells. And so this is one of the things that we discovered. I was at a medical conference at the Perinatal Stem Cell Society, and Arnold Kaplan was talking about the way to bypass the blood-brain barrier by using a spinal cath, which you can see the device right there. That's what it looks like. And that spinal cath is able to get these tissue allografts or these stem cells into the back of the sinuses. And I watched the report, where they could see the migration of these stem cells into the brain and then into the glymphatic circulation. And they were able to target areas of the brain with patients who had traumatic brain injuries, and they had a lot of anxiety and ADHD. And so I said, I have a lot of anxiety and ADHD, and I want to get this done. I've had a lot of concussions too. And so I went back to the office. I talked to Arnold Kaplan. I got the dosing that they were using and had it done. And it just made a profound impact on my brain. And we've seen that in close to 1,000 patients that we've treated, just phenomenal clarity because of the ability for these cells to help with hippocampal neurogenesis. It helps break down some of those amyloid beta plaques, but most importantly, it stabilizes those microglial cells so that you get better transmission in the brain cells. And that's the real key, is this signaling property.
Yeah. This is such a game-changing application. I know you have your story. I noticed the biggest thing for me with intranasal stem cells was like name and memory recall. You see someone from high school or from years and years ago, and it's like, oh, I know that face, but I can't remember their name. And that was one thing I noticed, like within like 30 days after that, I remember like running into a few friends and past colleagues that I hadn't seen for years. And it was just like, boom, I had their name on the tip of my tongue, as opposed to like having to go back in the archives and think about it and not remember, and then wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, that was John.
Yeah, that's the worst. Well, and I think this is, it's an application that, we see pretty, globally, is that people just notice like their vision's clear, their sense of smell, their taste. I mean, there's so many great benefits overall. Here's some of the studies, what they've seen, at least in mice. And once again, these models don't always translate over, and that's where clinically we're gathering more and more data all the time. But in mice with the ischemic brain damage, that's ischemia is where you lose blood supply and you have tissue that starts to die because of the loss of oxygen. And they found that just by using these intranasal stem cells, they found that there was decreased inflammation, enhanced neurogenesis. So that just means the formation of new nerves or the birth of new nerves, reduced brain tissue loss, improved behavioral performance. I mean, we've even seen this in kids who they couldn't, last in class without being disciplined, and they have the treatment done, and they're just like, they can calm down for the first time in their life, which is phenomenal. Here's some of the interesting studies. This is a study, and I'll pull this one up for you guys, but it's interesting because you'll see that there is this pathology of, here we go. Let me share this.
One thing while you're pulling that up, Regan, I think you mentioned, everyone's on, not everyone, but there's lots of studies out there on Alzheimer's and those diseases. And you mentioned like the cure is not found. It's not like we got this magic bullet cure for those diseases, but yeah. I think, the most important thing that listeners can get out of this is there's some really good solutions on prevention. Is probably the biggest thing I see is if, just like Chinese proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree, would be like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Next best is now. But if you can start before any symptoms or any of those things come up, these are all, good strategies that, I would imagine would reduce those risks. I'm not saying it's the cure, but like if you can take care of your brain really well now, as opposed to once you start noticing your brain going, that's probably the biggest piece you can do.
Man, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the key because, there's no silver bullet for your brain. And this is just one piece of it. But I think this one piece, and that's what we've been talking about in this whole brain series. And so if you're listening to this, make sure you go back about 4 episodes ago, because, we've been taking a deep dive in. And some of you have loved it. Some of you are like, it's too technical. And so I apologize if it's too technical, but I think these are really important things to look at. So yeah, here's this intranasal delivery of the mesenchymal stem cell secretome. They're finding it repairs the brain of Alzheimer's mice. So if you have a pet mouse that has Alzheimer's, this study it could literally, save
mice life today.
Yeah, really could. But, and once again, there's a bunch of the study that doesn't necessarily translate in humans. And you'll see that in humans, it's not just stem cells. You've got to add other things. You've got to have like the mitochondria. So this is where SS31 is shown to be very protective in the mitochondria that's been damaged in neurodegenerative diseases. You've got humanin, another peptide that repairs the mitochondria. You've got 5-amino-1-MQ, MOTC, and then you bring in methylene blue, and so you're activating the mitochondria. But then you want to think, okay, NAD and glutathione, those peptides, and using those intranasally. And then you got to work on the gut, and then we got to work on the cardiovascular system. And it's not just one thing. And I think that's what we all hope. But I think probably the biggest thing is when there's damage, or if you're looking to stay ahead of it, like how can we detox and flush the brain? And this seems to be one of a very promising therapy. And what they found in these mice that rapidly restored the memory in a 12-month-old mice, albeit transitly. But they found that this injured environment, or where the amyloid beta plaques were, that the mice, after they had these intranasal human stem cells, specifically derived from neurites, they found that these mice actually did better. The plaque and the glial cells were improved. They looked at different markers from the mice as far as their inflammatory markers. That was improved. The glial activation seemed to calm down on those microglial cells. And here's where they kind of record all their findings. And so this does not mean like, okay, we figured it out because it works in mice. But what we do know, like to Cade's point, is if you want to protect your brain, today is probably the best day to do it.
100%.
Awesome. Well, you guys are amazing. And the challenge for this week is for you to do some flushing on your own glymphatic circulation, calm down those microglial cells. And one of the best ways you can do this is to let your head hang below your knees. And for some of you, if you can do a full handstand, you get there, and Cade, do some push-ups, some handstand push-ups. Those are not easy, but they're really good to get the blood down, or do an inversion. For those of you who have an inversion table, or just if you're sitting, put your head below your knees for a minute and just force a little bit of blood circulation into your brain. And that's a good way of clearing out the glymphatic circulation. So do that every day, ideally in the evening before you go to bed, just to flush things. And make sure you're breathing when you do it, and sit up slowly if you tend to get dizzy. And that will be a great way for you to start activating some of that glymphatic circulation.
That's awesome. I've never even thought of that. I got to do more handstand push-ups, get some circulation going better.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it'll be amazing. And how many of you on here have ever done handstand push-ups?
They are not easy. Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Burn your shoulders.
So we're doing the presidential challenge in 8th grade. Did you have the presidential challenge, or did they get rid of that when you were in school?
No, I think they got rid of it.
I think I was like the last one, and then you guys just got soft. Yeah, I had the school record for the most handstand push-ups. And
I didn't know that. That's awesome. Yeah, doesn't
Great.
this guy could bench press? He was like $150 bench pressing 300 pounds. And
Well, when I could bench 300, I was about $165. So there.
yeah, sorry, $165.
Yeah, much bigger. Yeah, cool. Awesome, you guys. Okay, well, you guys have a good time doing your handstand push-ups. Let us know how it goes. And here's to your healthy brain.
See everybody. Thanks, Reagan.
You got it.